So, Victoria, are you slumming it from the Ukrainecast studio down to the Newscast studio?
I'm not slumming it. I'm privileged to be alongside you, Adam.
Correct answer. So today we had Keir Starmer unveiling the 5 missions that would kind of guide a future Labour government. And this is on top of Rishi Sunak's 5 pledges, which he did last month. So I was wondering if maybe newscasters could suggest 5 missions/pledges for this very podcast.
Yes, I'm sure that will be a great idea. Can I suggest?
Get the ball rolling, yeah?
Yeah. I've got a couple. More of you on TikTok.
I knew you were going to come up with a TikTok pledge. Just Queen of TikTok.
Yeah. And less chit chat about your moustache.
Just to be clear, quite often it's the guests bringing up the moustache. Like Michel Barnier, the first thing he said was about the moustache. It wasn't like, oh, stick to the Northern Ireland Protocol, UK government. It was like moustache. So I can free speech.
Okay, fair enough.
I was going to say I've already achieved one of my pledges, which was to reduce my screen time by an hour a day, which is pretty good.
A triumph.
And then you're like, well, hang on, is that a realistic? Is that an honest pledge? Something you've already done?
Yeah, no, you've already done it. You've
but Rishi Sunak's pledge is about halving inflation, and the OBR, the budget watchdog, say it'll be more than halved anyway. So that's kind of what they do, these guys.
Right. Okay. But in terms of newscast, you reducing your time on social media is not a newscasty pledge/mission.
True, it's more personal.
Yeah.
Anyway, why don't you come up with some pledges for us, and we will, in typical politician style, try to achieve them depending on the circumstances. Newscast.
It'll be an aspiration.
Aspiration, exactly. Newscast at bbc.co.uk, and we pledge to bring you an excellent episode right now.
Newscast.
Newscast from the BBC.
Hello, it's Adam in the studio.
Hello, it's Victoria in the studio.
And for some reason, they've turned the temperature up like really high in this studio.
It's absolutely baking in here.
Let's raise the news temperature by talking about what's been happening to... Oh, that was so lame, wasn't it? Anyway, so Keir Starmer, Labour leader, went to Manchester, did a big speech. It was billed as like a big speech, and he unveiled these 5 missions.
Yes.
How do you understand what a mission is?
Well, I looked it up on dictionary.com because it's not a promise, it's not a pledge. It is bear with me, let me get my notes.
Expansive goal?
It's an important goal or purpose.
Okay.
And so it's what he would hope to do should he form the next government, but it's definitely not a promise.
And the key test in politics of a list with 5 things on it is whether journalists at the end of the day can still remember all 5. So we test ourselves.
Let's go.
Fastest growth in the G7 by the end of the first year of the Labour government. First term of Labour government.
Highest sustained growth. Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
Yes, ma'am.
NHS fit for the future.
Yeah. Clean green energy superpower.
Correct.
Which I'm not exactly sure what that means because, anyway.
Making Britain's streets safe.
Safer streets. And also removing all barriers to opportunity for children. So basically, like a very 2023 version of health, education, crime, the economy, and energy.
Yeah. I mean, Ed Miliband, when he was leader of Labour, he had 5 promises, didn't he? Tony Blair.
Those pledge cards, a little pledge card.
That's right. And Tony Blair did it before the 97 election. So this is Sir Keir Starmer's version.
Now, there is somebody missing from the studio tonight. It's Chris Mason. That's because he was in Manchester watching Keir Starmer, a jacketless Keir Starmer, by the way, giving his speech. Here's how Keir Starmer sounded while Chris was watching him.
We're going to transform the way Britain does its business from top to bottom. We'll modernise central government so it becomes dynamic, agile, strong and above all focused. More open to expertise, to partnership with business, unions, communities and civil society. Mission-driven government.
And Chris Mason's mission is to get back to the office at some point. So we managed to grab a word with him as he makes his way here.
Hello newscasters from Manchester, where we've just finished our piece for the Telly News on Keir Starmer's speech. And a curious one this, because often you might expect me to say, all right, here's what was in it and start rattling off all sorts of policy ideas. There wasn't much policy in it, really. The strategy that Keir Starmer is adopting here is that he reckons in all likelihood the general election is probably around about 18 months off, maybe even longer than that. So he doesn't want to say too much too soon about specifics, because they could be a hostage to fortune. The idea seemed to be a good one. It could get nicked by the Conservatives or others. So instead, he's sticking to big themes or missions, as he calls them. What was striking as well today was the venue. It was the Co-op building here in Manchester. Quite an imposing venue, and lots of floors up above where Keir Starmer was speaking. And he tried to make a bit of a virtue when he walked in on how many people were there and people looking over from various balconies down upon him. And it was pretty well attended for a political speech, not in an election campaign. And you get a sense when you see Keir Starmer now on the public stage of the confidence a political leader gets when they are miles ahead in shed loads of opinion polls. It's inevitable, I suppose, isn't it? If you're miles ahead in the opinion polls and the opinion polls suggest you might be the next Prime Minister, you're perhaps bound to walk a little taller. So, what was in this speech then? This focus on missions, as he calls them. He reckons it's a new way of thinking about government. He says that he wants to get away from what he calls a sticking plaster approach to government, where things are sorted because there's a crisis and then you move on to the next crisis. And he talks about the backlogs in the NHS every winter as being a classic example of that. And instead trying to rewire how government works to ensure that over time a Labour government, if he leads one, if they win a general election, is able to stick to its central missions. Now, those central missions are not particularly surprising. He talked today about the economy, wanting to see a economy that was growing as faster than any other in the G7 group of industrialised countries by the end of a first Labour term, so within 5 years of a Labour government. Also a focus on the NHS and on education and on crime and a couple of other things too. Their plan is that over the coming weeks and months, they'll then flesh out each one of the missions. That will start next week when we'll see Keir Starmer popping up in the City of London, talking about their economic prospectus and talking to some business leaders too. I think the big question is going to be, for how long can he keep things quite big picture? When is there a greater clamour for detail?
So, in terms of these 5 missions, how do they compare to Rishi Sunak, the Prime Minister's promises, his 5 promises back in Jan?
Well, a lot of the subjects are the same. It's about growing the economy or managing the economy and sorting out the health service, although the way Rishi Sunak has done it is quite targeted things like a pledge on where inflation will be, where growth will be next year.
Reducing the debt.
And the size of the government debt overall. And the NHS pledge is much more focused on the backlog of people waiting for appointments and procedures.
And he had a very specific one, which was stop the boats.
Yeah. And there's none of that from Keir Starmer today. Although he did sort of talk a little bit about asylum, because there's a story today which we'll hopefully get onto about the asylum backlog and the number of cases being processed. So he did sort of talk about that, but it's not in the top 5.
No.
And also, so much of this is just about how he would try and run the government. And so actually quite a lot of it is about just the meetings he would have as Prime Minister and how they'd be different from the meetings that Rishi Sunak has.
But I suppose he's trying to set the parameters as he would like them to be set in the run-up to the next general election. These are the areas that he wants to fight the next election on, aren't they?
Yeah, but it would be good to put a bit more flesh on these bones, and we can do that now because we're joined here in the studio by the Shadow Health Secretary, Wes Streeting. Hello, Wes.
Hello.
Hello.
Right, there's loads of things we could ask about this. The health mission, first of all, when will you be fleshing that out? Because we only got flesh on the bones of the kind of one of the missions today.
Yeah, in the coming months, Keir's going to do a big speech. I mean, I've already given quite a bit of direction of travel on health and social care reform. It's the first part of the mission. There's a whole agenda there about life sciences and medical technology, which has enormous potential both to improve productivity in the NHS, but also to revolutionise the way we do medicine in this country, because we'll be able to not just diagnose and treat earlier, but potentially predict and prevent, which is just revolutionary in terms of genomics and data. And then the final thing, which is I'd argue the hardest bit and probably a generational challenge, is to close health inequalities in our country. Because if you're serious about that, that's not just a mission for the NHS or even the Department of Health. That's about tackling poverty. It's about poor quality housing. It's about low wages. So, and that I think probably epitomises why this mission-driven approach is so important, because government's got a role to play, but we can't do it alone. And so,
on that last massive role for the private sector,
for civil society, for trade unions, and for us as individual citizens as well, in terms of the choices we make, the decisions we make, particularly in terms of our health and well-being. So, I think I hope that what people take from today is a clear sense of what Labour's priorities are, but secondly, I hope that particularly those voters that are cynical about politics and the ability of politics to do any good, I hope they'll be reassured by the fact that we're not pretending we're going to be able to fix everything overnight or even in one term of a Labour government. And yes, there'll be those pledges and that manifesto for the first term and the yardsticks they can judge us on to decide whether we get a second term. But I think it's really important we don't keep on doing what I think the Conservatives have been doing, particularly on the NHS, but applies elsewhere, of sticking plaster, short-term gimmicks, quick fixes that don't work, and you stumble from one crisis to another. And in the case of the Conservatives, from one Prime Minister to another, one Chancellor to another, one Health Secretary to another.
So how do you get the highest sustained growth in the G7?
Well, and what is sustained, by the way? Is that 2 years, 3 years?
What percentage?
2 months?
Well, so the two parts of this. So in terms of how you do it, it's, again, going back to the point about the mission approach, it's a wide range of things. Firstly, government has to have a really clear industrial strategy, has to create the conditions for growth, to give businesses the certainty they need to invest. That's why the emphasis we placed on institutions, for example, respecting the OBR, the independence of the Bank of England, Rachel Reeves' fiscal rules. That's the kind of thing that's led to people like John Allen from Tesco saying when it comes to a plan for growth, Labour's the only serious team on the pitch.
I don't know what the plan is, though. What is the plan? How do you get it? Just because you respect the institutions does not mean the economy will grow.
No, that's where the industrial strategy comes in and kind of...
Which is what?
Back at Labour Party conference, Jonathan Reynolds set out Labour's industrial strategy for the country, which hold planks of the economy and where we want to take it. So in my area, for example, health and care, I thought it was really revealing, actually, that Johnny identified health and care as industrial strategy, not simply public service policy, because you look at the labour market at the moment and how many people are both unwell and therefore out of work. A big part of getting the health of the economy back in shape is the health of the nation, but also back in reverse and going back to what I was saying about life sciences. If the life sciences sector, and particularly some of the big players in this space who've got an international footprint, if they know what your life sciences approach is going to be, they're more likely to unlock investment. And one of the reasons why we've set out these missions so far ahead of a general election is so that we can roll our sleeves up, sit around the table.
Are you saying that you're going to create the environment that will allow all sorts of institutions, private companies, etc., to invest?
To invest.
That's how it will grow.
Yeah, that's part of it.
Because there's no guarantee that that will happen, even if you create the right environment.
Well, I think we've been really encouraged by the conversations we've been having with business leaders.
Sure, but there's no guarantee
the
that growth will happen, and certainly not the highest sustained growth in the G7.
Yeah, but look at what the last Labour government did. If the economy had grown under the last 13 years of Conservative government at the same rate it did under the last Labour government, there'd be, as Keir said today, £40 billion to either invest in public services or to cut taxes and put money back into people's pockets.
They had a financial crash to deal with, the Conservatives, when they came in 2010.
I think the Conservatives can point to the long tail of the financial crisis and the pandemic and the war in Ukraine as facts in mitigation as to why their economic record has been so poor. But that doesn't explain why we've had rock bottom growth, low productivity, wage stagnation for more than a decade. Those are partial explanations, but they're certainly not excuses for the poor mismanagement of the economy that we've seen. And so government can help to create the conditions for growth, but also government's got an active role to play in growth. So, for example, education and skills is absolutely vital for making sure we've not just got the workers we need, but the skills we need. Making sure the NHS is functioning properly means that we've got a healthy, happy, motivated workforce. So I think what sets Labour apart from the Conservatives is that we understand the role that the state can play. And unlike, you know,
so what level, what percentage of growth are you looking for? 2%, 2.5%, 4%, 5%?
Well, under the last Labour government, we saw growth of over 2%. But as Keir said today, we are going for the ambition of being, highest sustained growth in the G7, which is hugely ambitious. And I'm quite comfortable with people saying today, bloody hell, that's really ambitious. Are you sure you're going to be able to do that? Well, as Keir said, actually, why shouldn't Britain have the highest growth in the G7.
Well, the things that were rejected. So, for example, did Rachel Reeves say, "Oh, we considered this target for growth, but we rejected it"? Because I'm just intrigued how these missions get designed and the aspirations.
It's been a really collaborative process across the shadow cabinet. Because again, even my mission, which of perhaps of all the missions, people might say, "Oh, well, that's just about the NHS and Department of Health." We can't do what we need to do in terms of the health of the nation without a genuine cross-government approach, a partnership with business and wider civil society if we're serious about tackling health inequalities or working with the life sciences and medtech industry to revolutionise treatment. And so it has been a collaborative process, and we're all happy with the missions as established. But in terms of the specific milestones, for the health mission, the education mission, the law and order mission, we'll be setting out the milestones, the yardsticks in the coming months.
So are they promises?
Pledges.
Is this your offer to the voters? Are you saying we are promising you, the voters, we will do this if we form the next government?
Yeah, so to be clear, the missions are about where we want to take Britain in the long term. In our manifesto, we will set out the specific promises for that Parliament and the measures by which voters can judge us. All of our promises will be fully costed and fully funded, and all of our targets that are specific will be for the Parliament, and we can be held to them, because we want to, if we're serious about achieving these missions, it's not a one-term project, it's at least a two-term project, but we won't get a second term unless we deliver on the pledges of the first term.
This speech was in Manchester. You were all there. Did you all get the train together, like a sort of shadow cabinet school trip?
Myself, Rachel and Johnny Reynolds got the train up last night, and
Right.
other colleagues followed, and then I came back on my lonesome because we were all going to different parts of the
So
country.
when the gang is on the train together, like you sat there, like eating Haribo, drinking those little bottles of wine you get at the train station.
I've actually given up cakes and sweets and chocolate for
For
Lent,
Lent.
so
Okay.
I'm very, very virtuous. But we did.
And you all sit
might
and
have had
chat,
a-
or are you like doing a Sudoku and Rachel's got her headphones on and not talking? I'm just
Well, if you
intrigued
look at
what
my
it's the-
Instagram story from yesterday, you'll have seen that Rachel Reeves was reading the Financial Times to myself and Johnny Reynolds.
Okay.
I mean,
An audiobook.
And that's not actually. I mean, it's
Like
not
a bedtime story.
It's not, well, yeah, it's not actually how we normally spend our train journeys. But no, we may have had a gin and tonic on the train up and setting the world to rights. And actually, I mean, Rachel and Johnny are very good friends, but also on the life sciences and technology piece, we're working really closely together as a team. And I think that's the other thing that I've certainly felt, having been in the shadow cabinet for about 18 months or so now. There's been a galvanising of the Labour team. I think in the process of putting together these missions and thinking in a really serious way about what we would do in government, it's galvanising the team.
So what I want to know is, Keir Starmer's done this sticking plaster politics pitch a few times. Does sales of plasters go up every time he does it? People go, "Oh, I need to go and get some plasters for the first aid kit." Be an intriguing little stat to find out.
It will indeed, but we've
Well,
got
that's
to fix
your
the
mission for this evening.
Yes.
The Newscast taking on all the big questions of the day.
Yes, thank you very much.
Thanks very much.
Thank
Nice talking to you both.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot.
Thanks for coming in.
Well, the studio is turning into a bit of a train station now, because as one guest goes, another one arrives. Although he's not got a train here, he just walked across the road from the House of Commons. It is the Security Minister, Tom Tugendhat. Hello.
How are you? It's
Hello.
nice to be here.
I see you've got a pen and paper out. Are you expecting an exam?
Well, you never know. I so often forget things. I think taking a note every now and again isn't such a bad idea.
It's because Victoria's here, isn't it? If it was
you go.
Chris Mason, you'd be like, I can wing this.
I wouldn't have got it out, except you guys have got notes all over the
Yes,
know.
right. Wow. First of all, I mean, so the big political news story of the day has been Keir Starmer's 5 missions. I mean, actually, is there anything that you would disagree with in those missions?
Well, what I like about Keir is that he's always up for a new relaunch. I think this is his 10th or 11th, so I'm delighted to see he's doing so well at it.
How many prime ministers have you had?
Well, this is all on Keir, and he's a great guy. We were elected on the same day, and I'm very I'm very fond of him. But here we go again. It's another one, and given that these relaunches tend to include pledges that then end up being dropped, like his commitment not to outsource on the NHS, or his commitment to free movement, which he's dropped, and so on. You'll forgive me, I don't take it too seriously.
A big thing about it is just how government actually operates and focuses, and how the machinery of government can be kind of moved into a place where it responds to things better. Now, you used to be in the armed forces, so you know about going on a mission. You're a minister now. Do you think he's onto something about just how this giant kind of leviathan of government actually works in the year 2023?
Well, I think the person who's onto something actually is Rishi, and what the Prime Minister's just done is split up BEIS into 3 departments. Now, that's incredibly important. Getting science and technology to actually deliver for this country, to really transform us. for this new industrial revolution, for this digital revolution. That's hugely important. To make sure that we've got business and trade working together, actually delivering, I think that's hugely important. And, there's a whole series of areas of, where we've put some effort into making sure the machinery works, because that is absolutely, I'm afraid that really is important. You've got to make sure that the government works in a way that delivers.
But as a minister, do you find yourself kind of pressing metaphorical buttons and just like nothing happens, or it happens very slowly and you just wish it was a bit faster?
Hey, look, I'm lucky. I'm in the security area of the Home Office, which means that
it's pretty quick.
It's pretty quick.
You talk about things happening quickly in the Home Office. One of the agencies deals with asylum claims, and the backlog of people waiting for their claims to be processed today was revealed to be the highest it's ever been since they started counting these things. That's not responsive and quick, is it?
Well, and that's why Rob Jenrick's done so much work in reforming this. If you look at what he's done, actually, it's pretty remarkable. Actually, he's got a whole team transformed on that, and he's making all the difference that you really need. Now we need to make it sure it delivers, and frankly, the support and the emphasis that the Home Secretary Suella has been putting onto this has been really fantastic. So we're beginning to
are you in that position in terms of the asylum backlog because of 13 years of Conservative government?
No, I think we're in that position because there's a huge number of issues that have changed in recent years, and we've seen a greater pressure, as you know, Victoria, on migration over the Channel. That's just simply a fact, I'm afraid. That it's not just us dealing with it. You go and talk to the Germans or the French, as I do, go and talk to the Italians. They're seeing extraordinary pressure on them for exactly the same reasons.
But the UK used to do it much more quickly. What's gone wrong?
Well, I'm not going to talk historically because I'm afraid I've only joined the department, as you know, about 4 months ago. But what has happened is that Suella and Rob, and actually the Prime Minister has given the resources as well, have transformed the element that's going into that and making sure that we actually get this through, because it's not fair on people either to have people here who shouldn't be here or to have people waiting who need a decision. Both parties, if you like, the British people and the asylum claimant need an answer, and need an answer soon. So I'm very glad that what we're doing is we're putting the resources in to make sure we get those answers.
Are you happy with this idea, this notion that those who came before June last year won't have to have an interview? They'll just fill in a several-page form.
So there's a huge amount of discussions going on at the moment. I'm not going to comment on the different ideas that are propping up all over the place, because some of them are more speculative than formal. But what I am convinced that we've got to do is we've got to have a resolution to this, because this cannot continue. It is absolutely clear that we cannot have a system where hotels in communities around our country are being requisitioned for use, by the state, when frankly they should be used to promote the local economy. They should be local businesses that host everything from wedding parties and Rotary groups to weekenders. That's what they're there for.
Do you think the people who've been protesting outside of those hotels in the last few weeks have got a point and they're justified?
Look, I think what we've got to do is we've got to make sure that we're resolving the problem, because the challenge that we've got is that the government has got to be in a position to be able to make sure that we control our borders. That is a fundamental part of governing the United Kingdom, and I know that's exactly what we're dedicated to doing. The Home Secretary has spent quite literally the last how long has she been Home Secretary? 4 months now.
Well, she had 2 goes at it.
True, but she's been there for 4 or so months. And
still the boats come.
Well, not at the moment, actually, but yes, there's still a challenge from the. You're absolutely right, and that's why we've had Stuart Skeets, General Skeets, helping the Home Office and doing a huge amount of difference, and we're working now with the French and the Dutch and the Belgians to make sure that we have a combined effort, because the reality is, there's hundreds of miles of coastline on the North European coast, hundreds of miles. And there's nothing that we can do to patrol that. That's not British territory. So what we've got to do is we've got to work with our partners and our friends. And I have to say, the relationship that the Home Secretary has built up with the French Interior Minister, her equivalent, has been exemplary.
Let's talk about Ukraine now, because tomorrow Victoria is going to be doing a special episode of Ukrainecast in the Radio Theatre with big audience and lots of people from Ukraine. Now, I remember in our old jobs, when I was doing the news in the morning and you were the chair of the Foreign Affairs Select Committee, I remember calling you one morning. You're like, I'm in Kiev! And it was about 2 weeks before the invasion, when we were calling Kiev, Kiev. Did you know at that point the Ukrainians were going to put up such a fight and that they'd still be fighting hard a year later?
So,
be honest.
I've got to be honest. I didn't think that. I thought they'd try. I wasn't at all convinced they'd succeed.
Right.
The Ukrainian government, under the extraordinary leadership of President Zelensky, turned around a entirely civilian economy and country turned it from being a sheep into a porcupine overnight. It was a remarkable achievement, and we can see the result now. They're quite literally on the front line of freedom. They're quite literally defending, the West, if you like, as a term, the Western European, more Western European, because some of them are Eastern, but you know what I mean, countries today, and it's phenomenal. So we owe them a huge debt of gratitude, and we're with them.
You'll know that Boris Johnson is saying to Rishi Sunak, send fighter jets to Ukraine now. Do you agree?
So I agree that we've got to prepare for that, and that's exactly what the Prime Minister's doing. He's training pilots, and
So it is going to happen.
Well, I think we've got to keep.
So we are preparing for that. Yeah, that's an interesting way of putting it. Because what
you're not
preparing. What are we preparing for? Are we preparing Ukrainian pilots
to be able to fly
our planes?
Exactly,
because we've sent them.
We will be.
Or we have the option to.
Right.
What you don't want to do, you see, is you don't want to make the decision to send planes and then say, right, now it's going to take you 6 months to learn to fly them. So we want to do everything we can in advance so that when we take a decision, the decision happens. You don't want to have the delay later. You want to have the delay, you want to get rid of the delay as quickly as possible. So we're training the pilots now, which I think is an extremely important decision. I think, the Prime Minister's made that call absolutely right. So you want to make sure that you've got the resources, you've got the logistics in place before you send them. And that's really difficult. It's not something, bluntly, that we would want to do on our own. We'd want to do it with partners for obvious reasons, because you need to maintain a supply chain of spare parts and everything you need.
So what do you think of Boris Johnson calling for this publicly now?
Well, look, the Prime Minister is responding, is leading entirely in the right direction on this. So, it's nice to have the support, I'd say.
We're expecting some kind of peace plan or peace proposal from China, potentially to be published on the 1-year anniversary of Russia's full-scale invasion.
Will it be Russia's complete withdrawal from the Ukrainian territory, according to the UN?
This is what I'm asking you. How much credence are you going to give to that?
Well, China is a permanent member of the UN Security Council and is extremely keen to remind us that its territorial integrity must be respected. It would be pretty extraordinary if Beijing were not to respect the territorial integrity of other states.
Tom, thanks very much for coming in.
It's very nice to see you.
Thank you. So this time tomorrow, Adam, I'll be in the BBC Radio Theatre in New Broadcasting House, and we will be with an audience of mostly Ukrainian people who have escaped the war to find safety here, and we're bringing together Newsnight and Ukrainecast for a special programme to talk to the members of the audience, to get their thoughts on the last 12 months, of course, because tomorrow is the 1-year anniversary since Russia launched its full-scale invasion of Ukraine, and to find out how they think this conflict might be brought to an end. And that will be available on BBC Two and BBC Sounds and BBC iPlayer.
And it's so weird to think I can remember as clear as a bell on my phone the first episode of Ukrainecast popping up as download this now, and to think that was exactly a year ago.
Yeah, and so much has happened, and perhaps there were experts way back at the beginning who thought this wouldn't last for a year. It might be over in a month, it might be 2 months, but we're still here 12 months on with hundreds of thousands of people having lost their lives or being injured, and 8 million refugees in limbo. That is the biggest refugee crisis since the Second World War. So it really is an event that has changed the world.
And it's interesting you say that, because as part of the news today, I was researching the asylum statistics, and there's something like the number of Ukrainian refugees that came last year is equal to the total number of refugees granted refugee status in the UK from all countries over 7 years.
Really? Yeah.
Wow. Oh, good. Now that I say that out loud, you realise that that's huge. Yeah. Okay, so lots to discuss on that special episode of Ukrainecast, which is a Newsnight co-production, which you'll also be able to watch on iPlayer as well. And that's all for this episode of Newscast. Thank you very much for joining us. Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Newscast.
Newscast from the BBC.